All right, everyone. So let's actually get into using the program. So this is, if you create a new document in Figma, it's going to look something like this. Up here, these are your toolbars. It's deliberately very simple. That's kind of the point. There's really not a lot of tools to play around with. Over here is kind of the properties, and we'll talk more about that in a second. And this is going to be the area that you're going to draw into. So the first thing you have to do is create what's called a frame. A frame is your document. It's what you're eventually going to export out of. So you grab this. You can click and drag, or you can just choose one of these presets if you want. So there's presets. This is really more for UX, where it's like this is the size of an iPhone. This is the size of an iWatch. I'm just going to create a click and drag to make a frame here. You can see where it says frame 1, and then over here it says frame 1. So what I'm going to do is, if I wanted to reset the size of this document, over here in my design, you can see now I have the properties here. I'm going to set this to 300, and then set this to 300. So I've set this to 300 by 300. At any time, you can always also, if this is active, you can literally just see how this is a double-ended arrow. You can make this bigger or smaller by clicking on the sides. I like to be very precise, so I usually use the width and the height, or the W and the H option here. All right, now that I've got that, this is my document. I'm going to create a vector. Okay, so I'm just going to start. You can create any simple shape here. I'm just going to start with a rectangle. And I'm deliberately make this very small. The reason why is I want to show you how you can scale it as big or as small as you want, and there's no real issues. So there's my shape. It's pretty much that simple. You just click and drag. If I wanted to make like a perfect square, I could hold down Shift to make a perfect square. Typically, you start by this from the center. If I wanted to start from the middle, I could hold down the Option or the Alt key and start from the center. You can see I'm starting from the center of the shape and not the upper left. Okay, so I made a shape. I'm going to zoom in here into my document. The way you would zoom in Figma is using Control or Command plus and Control and Command minus. You can also go by the Figma view option, and there's a zoom in, zoom out option too, if you want to do it that way. All right, I'm going to select the shape here, and defaultly it's probably going to be gray. That's the default color. Vectors have two parts. It doesn't, in this case we're using Figma, but this would also be true if this was Adobe Illustrator or other based programs. So if I have a vector, there's an interior part, like the color, whether it's a color or a gradient. This is known as the fill. And then there's a color there's an outline that goes around the shape. Okay. This is known as the stroke. I'll show you in our design palette how we can set this up. So make sure you're in design, not prototype or inspect. If this is highlighted, you'll actually notice there's a section called Fill, and I can click on this, and I get a little color picker, and I can choose any color I want. So I can set it to, this is my hue, red, orange, green, blue, indigo, violet. This is dark to light colors. This is from low saturated to high saturated colors. So I can set my fill, okay? If you want to set it to being semi-transparent, this is your opacity option. So I can make it semi-transparent if I want to. As I mentioned, there's a line that goes around the shape. That is your stroke. To add a stroke, you go to the little tab that says stroke here and click on the plus sign. And you can see it adds this black line that goes around my shape. This is the color of that stroke. It's defaultly black. You might want to change it to a different color. I'm going to make mine like a deep purple here. And I can make it thicker. This is my thickness of my stroke. You can also set it to go outside inside or center, which means kind of, you know, half inside, half outside. Remember before I was talking about one of the beauty of vector graphics is you can click and drag. So notice that when I click and drag and make this graphic bigger, it never distorts. It always stays nice and crisp. Now I know this is just a square, but even something more complex like a star or something, even if I was to scale it up, it doesn't distort at all, which is really nice. Alright, so we can make basic shapes. You know, there's a rectangle, there's an ellipse. You can use this to make ovals or to make circles. There's a star tool as well. Anytime you add an item to your scene, it should go over here. So this is my star. They called it star 1. This is called ellipse. If you want to rename it, you can rename it. I'll call it my star. Hit return. I'll call this one green circle. You can use the eye icons here to turn off temporarily your items in terms of visibility. You can also use the lock icon to lock them. Imagine adding a stroke. If you ever want to subtract either a stroke or a fill, you can do that by hitting the minus. So right now you can see that my star here has sort of a black stroke that goes around it. I'm just going to hit the minus sign, and that removes my stroke. You can also technically remove your fill too. So right now it's like I have a green fill and a black stroke. If I actually hit minus on the fill here, that would actually subtract the fill. And now it's basically kind of like a ring, where it's just a solid interior shape. Another thing too is when you create a document in Figma, it's usually going to be called untitled. If you want to rename it, that's what you would do actually up here. So I'm just going to click right up here in the middle. And I'm going to call this my Figma document. I'm going to hit return. And that's going to save my document. And, you know, if I was to go back to my files, you can see this is the name of it. I can always double click and go back into the file. So we can make lots of shapes, and we can give them different colors by using the fill option here. Sometimes what we may want to do is make more complex shapes. So to do that, we can actually edit our shapes. So I can edit by just literally kind of making it bigger or smaller, kind of like scaling and rotate. If I put my cursor a little bit beyond, you can see I can rotate too. So this is very similar to, like, you know, we talked about, this is similar to, you know, the crop tool. I might want to edit the parts of my shape, the parts of my vector. So the way that it works is that vectors are made up of what are called anchors. Okay, the anchors are between two lines, so this is what's called a segment. And the way you would access your anchors is, let's say you have a shape. Actually, let me use a slightly more complicated shape, maybe like an ellipse. Okay, here's my ellipse. I'm just going to double click, and you're going to see these white little circles here. Okay, you'll also notice that the menu changes a little bit. So you're actually in edit mode. You're actually editing this vector, and what you can actually do is, now that you're in editing mode, you can actually highlight a vector, or sorry, highlight an anchor, and be able to move it. When you move an anchor, it changes the segments. These are the segments that connect them. And so essentially you're changing your shape. So you can see by moving around my anchor points, I'm changing the shape of my item here. Now, you might see this. Wonder what that is. This is actually, this is where I wish I could draw on top of my thing here, but this is what are called Bezier handles. B-E-Z-I-E-R, Bezier. They're named after a man named Rene Bezier. And what these Bezier handles do is they control the curve of this line from this anchor to this anchor. Okay, so this controls this curve. The second one here actually controls the curve from this anchor to that anchor. So for instance, if I wanted this shape to be a little bit bigger, I might take this Bezier handle and just kind of move it a little bit. And you can see that by moving it, I'm changing the intensity of this curve. You can also use it to change literally the direction of this curve. So you notice that if I play around with my Bezier handles, typically there's two of them. And they typically kind of, if you move one, you can kind of notice that the other one kind of goes in the opposite direction. So if I pull this one up, this one goes down. If I pull this one up, this one goes down. If you want to work with them independently, you can do what's called breaking a handle, which is to use Option or Alt. And this allows me to move my handles independently of each other. Okay. When you're done editing your shape, you can hit Done, and that gets you back into sort of your standard, editing mode. And when you click on something, you get options like fill and stroke and things like that.